You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording is a special episode in conversation with my friend, author, and public theologian Damon Garcia. In this episode, we have a wide-ranging conversation discussing his work and what has led him to write his forthcoming book, You Don't Need a Calling, an Anti-Capitalist Manifesto for a Life of Purpose. Thanks for tuning in. All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the Way Collective podcast. We've got a special episode for you all today with a really good friend of ours, member of our community here at Way Collective, author and public theologian Damon Garcia, who's got a new book that's coming out called You Don't Need a Calling, an Anti-Capitalist Manifesto for a Life of Purpose. What's up, Damon? Excited to chat.
What's up? Yeah, me too.
How you living?
Good. Yeah, just getting ready for this book to come out in a week from now and getting ready for the event we're doing at Third Window Brewing, June 22nd. And yeah, so that's partly why we wanted to get on here and talk to each other too, is invite people to that.
Yes, sir. Let the people know that it's going to start at 6 p.m., right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's down at Third Window Brewing Company here in Santa Barbara. You can grab tickets on Eventbrite, and we'll put a link to the tickets here in this episode, but you won't want to miss it because it'll be a wonderful presentation and conversation with Damon on a lot of the themes I'm sure we'll touch on today, but it's going to be a fun book release event. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Especially at Third Window. Third Window's
same.
The best. It gets better and better. Their drinks and their food and everything.
Yep. You can't beat the Smashies and pizza too.
Yeah.
Which is really fun. So, well, why don't you give us a little intro into the heart behind this new book that's coming out, and maybe just begin with what led you to the place where you wanted to write it, what was going on in your imagination as you conceptualized this book.
Yeah, what I mean when I say you don't need a calling is the type of calling I'm rejecting is one that says you need to become some better version of yourself in order to be lovable and valuable and worthy of community. And I feel like a lot of the religious versions of calling, especially in the West, especially in the United States, is that you need to become someone else, and then your life will really start once you find what God is scripted out for you to do. And until then, you're just lost and wandering and trying to find whatever works. And I'm saying you already are lovable and valuable as you are. And when we can live from that place, we can find all these small, simple callings all around us and realize purpose is found in the present just by showing up as we are. And there isn't anything wrong with you that you need to defeat in order to become who you were always meant to be, or any of that. And that's something that I think a lot of people realize as they get older, as plans start and fail over and over again. And at the same time, there's also a lot of people who get older and look back and think, oh, wait, did I miss my purpose somehow? Did I go down the wrong path? If I would have stayed with so-and-so, would I have been better off if I would have stayed with that church, or if I would have left that job earlier, would I have found something that made life feel worth it? And I just feel like that idea of splitting our lives into worth it and not worth it, or useful or wasted, is more so rooted in capitalism than a strong foundation of faith and contemplative practice and deep devotion to God. It's just capitalism that is really just being reflected when people talk like that in churches. And I just, in my own journey, felt like I had gone through so much of a evolution in my thoughts around my own calling. And when I was 18, I felt like God called me to be a pastor, and that was what I devoted my life to. And then years later looked back and some memories that I suppressed started to come back, and I realized that actually my testimony of being called to be a pastor actually had a lot of manipulation by
Mm.
predatory leaders
Uh,
in that story. And I feel like there's the naive version of my story of God called me and I'm just following it and God will work it all out. And then there's the critical version, which is like, actually, I was manipulated. And actually, if you even zoom out even more, that I was born into a colonial country where Christianity was forced on people. So maybe that's why I'm Christian. Maybe that's why I'm praying to this God in the first place. And then you
right.
just keep zooming out. You could find these instances of orchestration by others that can lead to
Mm.
this instead of just God leading the path. But then beyond that, I think it's realizing any single explanation is ultimately a reduction that just flattens out the whole story. If I'm just saying, oh, yeah, it was God did it all for me and God made a way, or saying, no, it was all just me being manipulated and all that
Yeah.
God stuff is BS, is also just equally reductive. And I'm trying to
Right.
find a different path where we can talk about God as someone and something that is experiencing this with us in real time.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of paths we can follow. The future is wide open, but we're all experiencing it together. And now, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get people to move toward is that bigger view of calling and purpose
Right.
and meaning in life.
I love that. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, I think some of you might on the podcast listening know that Damon and I have known each other for quite a while. We're good friends, and Damon's been around Way Collective since essentially the beginning of Way Collective
Mhm.
and has a long history of relationship. So I'm curious if we could get into for a moment, not just the connection between how capitalism forms the idea of purpose or calling. I think we will get into that right here in a little bit because there's a heavy connection between like you being a productive employee and like and how that means that you need to produce something in order to accumulate and have value. But for you, there, like, I feel like this is coming from a deeper place that's not just the larger system of capitalism, but it's also like your own personal journey of calling. You already talked a little bit about like the feeling of being called into ministry, but as you were wrestling with the main theme of this book, and you and I hung out a bit during that process as well, like what was going on in you as you were kind of disentangling from some of those narratives that you already named and trying to orient yourself to like write an entire, you know, uh, essentially like a manifesto on calling. Like what was going on in you as you wrestled through some of the stories that you had received, some of the, maybe the unquestioned assumptions of your own vocational path, and how did you like move through that season to kind of like write this book?
Mm. Yeah, it was hard. It took a lot longer than I thought it would to write this book. And we had to push the deadline multiple times and until we pushed it as far as we could. And it I was so excited at the beginning, thinking that I don't need much time. I'll take even less time than what they originally gave me. And then I think what ended up being really hard is having to confront my own ideas around my calling, my identity, and my own worth and productivity and value. All that just came, all the feelings around it that I think I had stuffed down in the past all
Mm,
rose to the surface,
mm-hmm,
and I had to confront it. And it was a lot harder than I thought it would be.
mm,
And funny too, like something that I realized while researching and thinking about purpose in this different way is that it's not good for you to think a lot about your purpose.
mm.
And then I was here writing this book about purpose, so needing to
Yeah.
think a lot about it. At one point, my editor was at Broadleaf was responding to a couple of the chapters I had written, and she kind of affirmed for me, like, yeah, of course this is hard. This seems hard. And she said that also not only is like it's just hard to write a book in general, but also what you're writing about makes you just want to go out into the world and experience life, but you have to stay here and write this book. And so it was like that was like interesting to hear.
Mm.
And that's what it but the whole time it felt like the book existed on some invisible realm somewhere else that I had to that I was like finding pieces of it. And
Yeah,
so
along the way.
yeah, like I could have given up early and said, I'll just turn this first half of the book into the book and decide that the second half
Mm.
is too hard.
Right.
Because I couldn't write anything for 9 months. I was just stuck every day trying to write and
Yeah.
couldn't do anything.
Right.
And then what the thing that actually helped me was learning the lessons of the book that I was writing. And I got unstuck in the middle of writing the book by reminding myself I don't need to write this book. In the same way, I don't need a calling. I don't
Right.
actually need to write this book. The part of me that has existed before anything else,
Mm.
before any identifiers or preferences or labels, that part of me is gonna be good whether I write this book or not.
Yeah.
It's gonna be just as it was this whole time. And so now that I know I don't need to write this book,
Mm.
there was so much pressure that was taken off, and then taking off the pressure of even being a writer, like saying like I'm not a writer. It's just this. All there is this. Like from a kind of non-dual perspective, it's just
Hmm.
this. And in this, sometimes this appears as writing, or sometimes it doesn't. But
Right.
either way, it's still just this. And just from that perspective, I was able to finish the second half of the book, and
Mm.
it was interesting to be able to learn the lessons of the book, but and it felt frustrating. Like I wish I knew all these lessons already to maybe write a better book. But I think at
Mm.
the end, it ended up making it more authentic,
Yeah.
and so
I
that was
mean,
a cool experience.
the process is the process, right? Like, I
Yeah,
think one of the things you uplift in the first chapter of the book is all the different yous that you likely encountered while you were writing it. You talk
yeah,
about the you that you could have been, the you that you should be, the you that you would be, the you that you think you are. And in that chapter, you also recount a conversation that you and I had
yeah,
about this idea of the self and what it means to, know yourself. Some of you may or may not know that some of Damon's social handles are "Who is Damon?" Right? There's a core question there that whether or not the name is supposed to be playful, it's just a reality of I think that we all have to enter into at some point in our lives is inquiring of our identity and who we are. And so I'm curious as you kind of continue to talk about the connection between how you understand yourself and the evolution of this book sort of flowing from that place. Like, what does that bring up for you when you think about that question, who is Damon now? Like, how do you answer
Hmm.
that on the other side of the book?
Well, yeah, that was definitely one of the things that inspired the book too, is that question. Like
Hmm.
after I'd written my first book, The God Who Riots, in 2022, I was super burned out after it come out, and I wasn't sure how to help fix that. And I remember I was eating with a couple of my friends and telling them, yeah, I'm going to go on this trip to visit my friend next week. And I was thinking maybe on my downtime, I could continue trying to like work and get back to creating stuff on the internet and promote this book more and stuff like that. And but I realized like I just need to rest for a while. I don't know what I'm gonna do after this. I just need to chill. And my friend was like, "Yeah, just go and be Damon." And I was like, "Yeah." And then we moved on in the conversation. But then I just got stuck on that mentally. Like, wait, go and be Damon. I don't think I even know what that means.
Hmm.
And then I came back in the conversation. I was like, I don't even know what it means to be Damon. When I try to answer that question for myself, I could think of the things I do or the things I'm good at. But to just be Damon, I don't
Hmm.
know what that means. And so I started slowly asking some of my friends, what does it mean to be? Or if someone told you, just go and be yourself. And then that's when I asked you. And then you were like, there is no Damon. We got extra
Yeah.
existential with me. And it was like, well, yeah, any solid, permanent, unchanging version of ourselves we could try to point to is likely already changed by the time we pointed to it. It's like we're constantly
Yeah.
growing, becoming, evolving,
Yep.
and it's like even like in a literal level, looking at yourself in the mirror,
Yeah.
that's like a past version of yourself by some
Yeah.
microseconds,
Right.
and it's but I've found that that journey of constantly looking and looking and looking, it ultimately leads to, I think, just anxiety
Mm.
unless you start to open up to this idea that who you really are is in a constant state of becoming.
Yeah.
When you're just trying to find, okay, no, I need to find the real, true self, then I'll know what to do, or then I'll know who I am.
Mm.
I think that that journey's endless because you're always changing. And
Yeah.
so
Yep.
it's being able to live from that place, I think really helped me open up what the way I talked about calling and purpose, because there isn't some true self I'm trying to get back to or that I'm trying to reach and become.
Mm.
It's
Hmm.
just it's all changing all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially, I not only, I mean, obviously I agree with you because this is a conversation that we've had before, but I know that you and I share an affinity for this Catherine Keller quote. She's,
Mm.
for those of you who don't know, she's a process theologian, just one of my favorite, she's in the pantheon for me of theologians. But she says that, to know myself is to know that I literally cannot know myself because in the act of knowing, I am only just coming to be.
Mm.
And part of that for me, I think, was such a gift because it's not only like that image. I love that image that you brought up of when you look in the mirror, you're like, who am I? Like there's this entity staring back at me, and I know it has a name, I know it has a life history, and those things are real. Like to me, though all those aspects of our identity are real, but there's no static me that we can ever point to and say, here I am, right? Other than what you said, which is, and you use this analogy in the book too, of like the river, of like, we're standing in the river. There's another Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, who said like, no one stands in the same river twice, right? And that's true
Hmm.
of the self. And so for me, a lot of the images that are used to talk about the true self are just far too static. I mean, even Richard Rohr has his book on the true self is called The Immortal Diamond, which
Mm.
for me is like, wow, that's a very static, image. It's like a diamond is hard. It's like, hard to cut. It's, immortal means like, it's like almost like, to me, it has a connotation of being unchanging. And yet the self that you allude to in the book, that you uplift in the book, and that we're talking about your own experience of getting in touch with is this self who has two aspects to it, right? It's becomingness, right? It's flowing forward, and it has this relationality. It's always set in community. And for you,
Yeah.
purpose seems to emerge from that place of understanding both of those things. So could you talk about for just a moment that reality, like how that sort of sets us in or sets our feet on different ground or kind of puts us in a different ball game altogether when we talk about what it means to have a calling, like using those images.
Hmm. Yeah, an alternative title could have been "You don't need a calling, you need community." And I feel
Right.
like that's a major message of the book is and realizing that's how it was for most of human history. This idea of someone saying, "What do I do with my life?" I think is a kind of a modern issue. And when most of human history was spent in these close knit small tribes and villages, where the answer to the question, "What do I do with my life?" was answered in the needs of the community. It's like,
Right.
well, what do we need today? I'll contribute to that. And then we see as societies start to evolve from their own self-evolution and also from war and violence and colonialism, forced change into these systems where people's work has to benefit a small minority of people who are ruling over the society. work is no longer about what are the needs of the community. It's
Mm.
about um, how do we make a
Profit.
product? How do we make a profit? How do we benefit this class of rulers and owners? And it's just I think that that is a major reason we slowly over time forget what what purpose is and what we're doing here. And then the real sad thing, I've wrestled with this in my life, and I know others wrestle with this all the time, is feeling like I need to become some better version of myself in order to be worthy of a community. Like once
Uh,
I succeed and achieve and have the good life, then people will welcome me into their community or people will show
right.
up around me. Like a big thing right now, unfortunately, in these social media memes is this thing called looks maxing,
Oh
where
yeah.
these influencers, these men influencers are um, taking drugs and pills and even like smashing some of their cheekbones in order
Yeah.
to look better, even surgery for some of them, in order to just look and look and look better and better. And it's it seems like a big part of it is like this is what we need to do in order to get women, in order to succeed in this society that cares so much about looks. But it also at the same time feels like it's just trying to skip over steps of learning how to be a community member. It's like instead of
Yeah.
it's especially with dating, like instead of learning how to like for these young men to learn to listen to women and care about what they care about, it's I'm just gonna look so good that they'll just come to me and want me.
Right.
And then same with a lot of like the entrepreneur bro stuff right now is just if you just get really rich and successful, have nice things, then people will appreciate you, respect you, and all this. So I think there's just like so much out there right now that's trying to teach people how to become worthy of a community. And the
Mm.
implication is that we're not to begin with. And
Mm.
so
Hmm.
and many people just go their whole life feeling like one day I'll be worthy of that. One
Mm.
day I'll get people to like me, get people to appreciate me. And it's just I think
Mm.
what we find is that when we start with community instead, is that we we find find people that can appreciate us for who we are, and we can appreciate them for who they are. And then from their needs and their interests, we can find purpose. We can find things to do. We can find things to do
Mm.
together and grow together and learn together. And so
Yeah.
I think that's really where people can find purpose. And a lot of people are just stuck outside of
Mm.
community thinking they need to find purpose before they find
Mm.
community.
Mm. And I think what I hear you naming there is one of the main insights of the book, right? Is shifting gears from seeing calling as some individualized secret, telos or direction that has like some kind of plan to it. That if you step off of the path of said plan, you're not on it. You're not in your calling anymore, right?
Hmm.
And instead saying what emerges from this like communal connection that from the people like you said who are around us, their needs, their like in a sense there's the image of mutual aid, right? And not just aid but also mutual creativity and what blossoms out of relationality. For a moment, and we can revisit that if we need to as this conversation unfolds, but I'm curious if you would just lay out the core problem really quick, like make a connection between why like the calling culture, you could call it, like of our sort of religious or sort of Western or late capitalistic, society. Uh, what's the problem with it, and how is it directly connected to the motives of capitalism? Like, what's your elevator pitch on like what would you say to somebody who's like, so like, what's wrong with calling again, and what does it have to do with capitalism? Like, lay that out for us.
Hmm. Really, it's this idea that we need to become someone else in order to make life worth it is the shortest way I could describe the problem and how that's endless. That there's never a point where we reach that. And I think people take advantage of that in others in order to sell them things, in order to manipulate them and get them to do stuff. And so
Right.
I I think a major problem with capitalism is this hoarding of resources that we're meant to share. All these resources that God put on this earth for all of us to share together are now owned and controlled by a small class of owners, turned into products that have to be bought with money, and we can only get the money by also selling our labor as a product to these companies. And getting a paycheck lower than what we're actually giving to the for the company. It's just a paycheck that they decide. It's wage labor is what they would call that. And from that money, getting some of what we need and hoping we could get more money to get more of what we need. And just we get stuck in the cycle of like the only way life could be better is if my paycheck could be higher, or if I could make more, if I had a better job, or maybe if we had some social programs that added some more money to my wallet, or made me not have to pay as much for some things. But we don't get to the core of that separation, which is the fact that the resources we're meant to all share are privatized. They're often we don't have a debate about capitalism. I mean, the word capitalism, all it really refers to is a system, an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production. And the means of production are capital. And so that's where the word capitalism comes from. And the owners are capitalists. But another way of moving beyond that would be social ownership, which is why people use the word socialism. It just means the people owning and controlling the means of production, the means of making and distributing resources, and having a say in how we distribute those resources and how we can share that together. And so it's at the same time also a socialist book, but it's also really trying to get people to pay attention to that core alienation, that core separation between us and what we need. And there's all kinds of ideas we develop about how we get what we need that become the way we talk about purpose and calling and meaning of life, of if I could just do this and this and this in order to get what I need. And I think what's really troubling is we may experience some sort of calling from God or our family, our community, but we don't have complete freedom to pursue our callings. We often have to reduce it to make it fit within the demands of capitalism, either by sacrificing the time and energy we put toward our calling as we give a lot of it toward our day job, or and also have to keep sacrificing more and more for our day job as the cost of living becomes worse and worse. Or the other choice is to try to turn our dream, passion, calling into a job. And at that point, you have to sacrifice some of the integrity and vision in order to make the dream job the most profitable version of it in order to get some income. And so this idea, when a preacher is on stage and says, ask God what your calling is and what God wants you to do, or what you feel called to do to provide for your community and family, it's like, it's not that straight and direct. There are some barriers in the way. And so a lot of these books about capitalism, or rather these books about purpose and these sermons about purpose and meaning, often just pretend capitalism doesn't even exist. And it's usually a lot of it only applies to people with enough privilege to maneuver around some of these capitalist barriers in order to find their purpose. But really, it's like I'm trying to say capitalism exists, and it affects the way we talk about purpose, and we need to update the way we talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I think one of the connections that I see you making in the book, is essentially that you talk about how capitalism turns our natural innate giftings into products instead, right? Like, and so you have this idea of gifts and grifts, and how capitalism sort of co-ops what we all do have, which is our natural ability to be creative and to contribute to community, and turns it into, I almost would add another word there, gifts, grifts, and grinds, right? Like turns it
Hmm.
into a grind that we feel like we have to somehow monetize ourselves, like in our gifts. And so, I mean, if you think about, just as you know, more than most, having been an online presence through YouTube and Twitch and all these other mediums where you feel like you have to like somehow grind to keep people like, tuned into your posts. And you and I were even talking recently about social media and how that's evolving and changing to the point where now just like creating good creative content isn't going to really capture anybody's audience because of how the algorithms are designed, right? And so
Hmm.
we're out here grinding to make a living, quote unquote. And yet you talk about how, there's something deeper. There's maybe perhaps a deeper calling that has to do with you kind of use the parable of the talents, right? So would you talk for just a moment about how you see, like perhaps recast a vision for us of how gifts could be used, not as a means to produce, consume, and accumulate, but instead just to contribute to the community?
Yeah, the way we use the word talent as innate skill comes from the parable of the talents that Jesus tells, and in that story, talents was a form of currency, and it's a famous parable that gets preached on a lot of the the master giving three of his slaves talents to invest and double his investment while he's gone. And then the master comes back. Two of them did double or triple their investments, but one of them says he hid it because he knew that he was a harsh man, and um it's something like that. I
And
don't
didn't want
remember
to
all the
lose it.
details.
He
Yeah, I
didn't want to
didn't want to
lose
lose
it.
it.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, and then he gets punished and condemned, and it's and then that story gets taught as like the master in the story is God giving all of us spiritual gifts, and you have to use it or else you will be punished and condemned like this guy in the parable. And what's interesting though is when we look at some of the historical context, we realize that kind of economic situation, in order to double their investments, required exploiting the local population, mostly farmers, where they would either put some of these farmers in debt, temporarily renting their land, or they would um, steal land from some of these farmers and rehire farmers that they just after they just stole their land to work on the land and then use the products to sell to another city for a higher profit. There's all these different ways to double the investment that all required exploitation. And so when this one servant does not do it, says refuses to and defies his master's orders, this is a guy who's actually choosing to be a bit of a whistleblower and say like I'm not going to be part of this anymore. This is what we're doing, and this is a
Hmm.
system that I refuse to contribute to, and he gets punished for it. And there's all
Hmm.
kinds of ways to interpret parables. That's the purpose of parables, is to be interpreted in all kinds of ways. But we often neglect this interpretation and don't see that maybe this is also how Jesus saw himself, because Jesus also called out the injustice of the system and was punished for it. And
Hmm.
so there is and I think what's interesting is not about that story isn't to just say like, oh, we're misinterpreting it. That's not really what talent is, or that's not really how we should look at gifts. But we can actually still see a message about gifts in there, but really realize it's about God gives us this energy, this love, this drive to connect with others, and in that journey there will be injustice, there will be corruption, there will be people standing in the way who try to restrict us from connecting and building a world that benefits all of us. And in that situation, you can just fit in and just do what the authorities tell you to do, even when you know it's wrong, or you can resist. You could be
Hmm.
like the whistleblower in the story.
Hmm.
And so I feel like that is another way to interpret that parable where we can still get a message about gifts and calling and purpose, is where we can realize our purpose is especially expressed in what we rebel against and what we stand up for and stand up against. It's not just about finding our fit in the world. And the
Right.
capitalist version of calling very much is about just finding the way you can become a legitimate member of society with owning property and having a patriarchal family, and then just keeping the whole thing going for others. And it's about yeah, I think another way of viewing purpose is looking at, okay, well, what about our resistance? It's not just the way we conform.
Well, and I feel like that's a, you know, a a much needed, you know, uh, counter word to, the system of things as they are. And I love that in the section of your book on essentially what work does to the worker, there is this image of how dissatisfied people are with their jobs. And you use, I think you cite a Gallup poll and talk about how, the majority of workers are actively looking for a different job, and only I think a quarter of them or so would say that they would recommend their workplace to somebody else, right? And
Hmm.
so in when that's the water we're swimming in, when that's the environment, what it looks like to be employed or to be productive in a capitalist society, like, and you offer this other word, right, which is that we don't need to look to those places where we can already acknowledge that we're dissatisfied to be the location from which we find purpose, we find calling. Like, how, I mean, as you think about the systemic aspects of all this, like the fact that after this podcast conversation, those things aren't going away, right? Like, this is still going to be the water we're swimming in on some level. Like, what do you hope people take away from this kind of idea or this book about calling, and how would that affect them as they're still living in these very systemic kind of like capitalist cultures and companies and jobs?
Mm. I think the biggest thing is realizing the world was made this way by other people. It wasn't always this way. So that means we can change it.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of discouragement and hopelessness right now because people feel like, well, this is just the way the world is and can't do anything about it. And we forget that it wasn't like this before. And so I think what's interesting is seeing a lot of young people right now speak up about the problems with work and even be completely anti-work, and a lot of stories of business people having a hard time with their younger employees because they don't just do whatever they tell them to do, like staying after hours even though they're not being paid for it, or taking on extra tasks that weren't in their contract. Little things like that that before were just like, well, you gotta be a team player and do extra things sometimes. And people are starting to ask why though, like why? And it's right now mostly being framed as like, oh, these young workers are just lazy and entitled. But I think what we're seeing is that some of them are just seeing how corrupt this system has always been and are speaking up about it, and
Hmm.
and also waking up to the fact that things have gotten worse, like in the 1970s, or a little bit before the 1970s. The rate of productivity and the rate of wages was growing together in pace with each other for decades.
Right.
And then in the 70s, with many policy changes, a lot of deregulation on companies, a lot of lowering taxes on the rich and hiring taxes on the poor, and no longer consistently raising the minimum wage. We see those 2 points, those two lines just diverge further and further and further apart as productivity continues to go up, but our wages stagnate. And if they would have still continued to go together. The federal minimum wage would be in the 20 somethings right now. And it's I think what we're seeing is a lot of young people realizing you're telling us we have to just follow along with what previous generations did, but we're not even getting the same benefits that previous generations did. We're getting less and less and less and required to
Right.
work more and more and more. And so I think what we're really seeing is the youth are trying to break a generational curse. And what's really unfortunate is seeing young people wanting to work less, wanting to express themselves more, and not care
Mm.
what other people think. And then
Yeah.
when you look at this writer, Bronnie Ware, wrote a book called The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. If you look at the regrets of people on their deathbed, looking back at their life, the top three are number one, I wish I would have not cared what people thought of me as much. Another one is I wish I would have worked less. Another one is I wish I would have expressed what I thought more. And it's like, yeah, this is what
Mm.
young people are saying. And then what
Yeah.
happens through the generations we've seen again and again is that those hopes for a different world get beaten out of them, and as they're worn down by the world, and they just accept the way the world is, and then they get on their deathbed and repeat what they're saying when they're a kid. And it's like, yeah, things can be different and people are
Yeah.
trying to change them. And so I want people to really realize we're all sharing this alienation together. People may try to separate us as like, well, there's the office jobs and the manual labor jobs, and then there's like the managerial jobs, and then there's the gig workers, and treat us all as separate groups that are all
Mm.
sometimes competing with each other. And yet, the alienation we all share is that the resources that were meant to be shared among all of us are being kept from all of us. And we all have to work in order
Mm.
to survive. And
Right.
so that is the alienation we're all sharing. And from like a leftist perspective, that's the difference. That's what the word working class means. It doesn't just mean like certain manual labor jobs. It means anyone
Right.
who has to work to survive. And so when we can all realize like, oh, there's a large working class and we're all sharing the same struggle together, we all can be on the same side and building a better world for each other. That is a purpose that I think is so much more fulfilling than
Right.
how can I make it individually and feel like I made it and successful and get a good community around me. When it's like,
Mm.
wait, how can we make this better for all of us? I think that's a purpose that we need to pay attention to.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, I remember you sort of playing with this idea, and I wonder if you would agree with what I'm going to say here about this, but that essentially, like when you awaken to all of these dynamics that you're talking about, like the water we're swimming in, and how difficult it is, like you talk about how like if you lose that sense of purpose that capitalism tries to coerce you into, there's this emerging sense of meaninglessness, right? This emerging sense that like it's worse than I thought, and nihilism can set in, and these other facets, depression. You mentioned that in the book. Like I wonder if a lot of us, when we're young and we realize these things, and we try to like express it, and then it gets squelched or snuffed out by the situation as it is, like, and then we just go along with the system for the rest of our lives, and then we regret it again at the end of our lives. Like, I wonder if we feel that way just because we don't see a lot of hope in basically trying to reform the system or revolutionize the system, right? And so, do you see it that way? I mean, I'm curious, like how you would maybe talk about that journey through those existential questions that emerge once you awaken to capitalism, and then yeah, would you say that similarly, that like do you wonder about that? Do you have hope for reform or revolution? Like how would you talk about actually changing the thing so that more young folks like in the middle of their lives are able to kind of like disentangle from it, you know?
I think what we've seen throughout history is an increasing pluralism, increasing democratization, increasing multiplicity. And so I think revolution will ultimately be a process that is approached from many angles and with many different groups doing many things. So that includes people approaching it from a more traditionally revolutionary stance, which is gathering communities and teaching them self-defense and getting them to and preparing them for like an ultimate general strike where we all together refuse to work and be prepared to defend ourselves if we need to. And in order to take over the whole government and transform things for the good of everyone. Like that's the traditional revolutionary approach. And then there's people who've tried to do it through electoralism, as let's get the different kind of people with different motivations into politics and get them to institute different policies where we can gradually reform and have and move on from capitalist ways of distributing our needs. And then and that both of those and throughout the 20th century were tried multiple times and failed multiple times. And then in other ways people was like, well, I guess maybe we just need to tame capitalism and just have just everything as is, but just have some better social programs. And that also tried multiple times, failed multiple times. And then others are like, well, let's just escape capitalism. Let's just have our own communes, our own co-ops, housing co-ops to worker co-ops, and just survive on our own. And that also tried and failed again and again, and many other strategies that people have tried. And I think the issue is that they're all isolated. Usually, is that they're just trying on their own. Is that they think we figured out the way to combat capitalism, and that's it. And then they sometimes even fight against the others trying another way to resist capitalism. And so I think that there will be ultimately revolution will require all of those strategies and new strategies that haven't even been thought up yet, and and finding a way we can yeah resist together. But ultimately, I think capitalism will lead to its own destruction, but not without people. It will
Yeah.
lead to people realizing again and again that this isn't working for us. This is
Yeah.
killing us, and we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen throughout history. Again and
Yeah.
again, these kinds of systems don't last forever. And then we move on to another
Yeah.
system, and we'll find problems with the next system too.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
a big thing
Right.
too. Like a socialist society will have its own problems. Even a communist, a classless, moneyless, stateless society only sounds like a utopia to us right now because we're comparing it to right now. But even
Right.
then, in that distant future, there will have its own problems, and we'll
Right.
have to figure it out then.
No, I really appreciate that response because I feel the multifaceted nature of it, right? We're not just trying to reduce this whole situation to one fix, one revolutionary fix, one, like you said, like, uh, election or whatever however we might think that, and recognize the plurality of events that are happening within this matrix of this world that we share. And yeah, I love that. I hope with you that that there is some pluriform possibility for us to continue to make change toward the common good throughout,
Hmm.
as this plays out. I actually want to shift gears though now for just a little bit and talk about creativity with you. Some of you may or may not know that I see Damon as, I hope Damon understands himself as an artist. And Damon has been a hip hop artist. He's created, multimedia through videos and recordings. He writes books, right? These things to me speak to, creativity. And for me, like within late capitalism, within the financialism, within all this stuff, like beauty has become, and you and I have had conversations about this before. There's even a Twitch stream we did where I think you titled it "Beauty is My Religion" with me, but beauty has become such a balm when everything else seems just commodified and everything seems commoditized, and I'm curious for you as a creative person, how that works for you. Do you, when you tap into the artistry of yourself, like, is there something in the work itself that feels sort of healing and generative and restorative for you, like in the midst of all these things that you're naming in the book? Like, talk about creative work from your perspective. I would love to hear you, share about that.
Yeah, when I experienced this calling to be a pastor when I was 18. At the time, all I cared about was music and film, and most of my friends are artists, and I thought that's what I was either going to do something in music or film, and that was the goal. And then ministry came out of nowhere, and I felt like I guess God wants me to give up my art for ministry. And then as I got into it and started putting together sermons, I realized, oh, this is actually coming from the same creative part of my mind, and this can still be very creative. And so I got really into communication and communication skills, took every speech class at my local community college. It's even realized, oh, there's a similarity between stand-up comedians and preachers in the way they put their thing together. And they usually have the same looking notes, which is a list of topics that remind them of where to go next. And they're trying to get people to feel something. And so it's like, and so for a bit, I was got into stand-up and did some open mic stuff in LA, and that helped me a lot. And I just over time slowly realized that I didn't have to give up my art. Like, this is just another expression of it. And slowly started doing music again with some of my friends, usually just like funny songs with a laptop and a microphone at somebody's house, and YouTube beats. And we would just like make silly songs, make each other laugh, and then slowly also started getting into the video stuff again, because after I'd left evangelical ministry stuff in 2017, I decided I'm going to talk about what I really believe on the internet. And so that included making a bunch of videos and also writing a bunch. And so all that stuff slowly came back into my life. And now it's just like, it's all part of me, making music for fun with friends, and making videos, and writing and teaching, preaching. All of that is just part of me, and it's all an expression, I think, of a deeper creativity that desires to just connect with other people. And I think it's interesting. Also, when I had left that evangelical ministry, that church and the job I had there all at once, and lost so many friends in that world, the only friends I had left were my artist friends. And I remember just being with them and feeling like this is enough. And then I remember I had an open mic at my house with them, and people just sharing some poems, some songs, some realizations, some revelations they had, just sharing with everybody. And I remember feeling like, this is church, this is God, this is all like deep and reverential, that the spiritual feeling that people feel usually just in religious spaces, I was feeling there. And I think there's something to that as well, is like that this is also very spiritual. Even if no spiritual words are being used or no rituals are being taken place, it's all that creativity, expressing creativity and using that to connect with others, very much is expressing God in the world too. And so And a big thing too that was an inspiration for the book, and I got into this in a lot in chapter 4, is helping people realize that we don't have to separate that those parts of ourselves and God over there is like, well, I like doing this creatively. I like connecting with people in this way. But what does God want me to do? Is a big
Mm-hmm.
point of anxiety for a lot of people. And they're
Right.
afraid of being disobedient. But I think it's like, no, it's all part of what God means for us to do. It's like, it's all
Mm.
part of it. It all
Oh,
belongs.
yeah. Yeah, no, I hear that. I mean, I think one of the signs of us moving toward maturity is that we're able to more deeply integrate what has been chopped up in the past into something like sacred and secular into one sacred whole that includes, you know, the both spirit and matter, both artfulness and creativity and chaos and disarray, right? Like and so I kind of hear in your sharing like that work. And I just want you to know, like, as I engage with your work, I see more than just the message, right? I see the artfulness, the intentionality, the creativity that's sort of infused through the ways that you frame and phrase things. I think for me, it's highly attuned to that. So again, that's just another plug. If you haven't pre-ordered the book, you should do it because the message is accessible in ways that are really creative and inspiring. So check that out. Along those same lines, though, I just heard you take that question kind of into God a little bit. So I don't know if you want to, but you'd be open
Hmm.
to it. I see process theology throughout this whole book. I would be curious. I mean, that's my lens, though, right? So I'm looking
Yeah.
for it. I'm looking for the ways that process relational thought is sort of infused into whatever's being said. But I'm curious for you, how do you think about God now? How do you juxtapose the God that you're referring to when you bring that up and when you bring that in the book versus maybe the one that was, associated with the old form of calling, like perhaps maybe like a purpose-driven life or something like that, right? Like
Right.
how would you talk about God now?
A life-driven purpose instead of a purpose-driven
Hey.
life, which is a joke many people have made again and again. But I think people love making that joke because that's a big revelation when they realize, like, it's serious. It really is like life-driven now. It's not about
Hmm.
some future-oriented thing that I have to become. It's like it's all happening right now. The point of life is happening right here, right now, and so a big yeah, inspiration was process theology, especially the stuff of God experiencing this with us in this real time, not having some predetermined future that we're following.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's how we all experience life, and that's also why people pray, like, because there
Hmm.
is a part of us that really does believe that the future is wide open.
Hmm.
And even if they may not admit it, but it's like, well, yeah, that's why we're praying. That's why we're hoping for something else. And it's and then another big thing, big inspiration for process theology is this deconstruction of all the omni doctrines, like the all
Hmm.
omnipotent, omniscient, all powerful, all knowing, all present is like taken as, well, these are just the basic characteristics of God that we all agree on, and or otherwise it's not God. But what's strange about that is that those characteristics, I would say, are just based on what we desire to be. It's like I feels like life would be better if I was all powerful. If I had more power, especially over other people, and I could just control how things play out. I wish I had that superpower. So therefore God probably has that superpower. I also feel like life would be better if I was all knowing. If I knew everything before anybody said it and before anything happened. Therefore God probably has that characteristic. It's like all those
Right.
feel like
Yeah.
it's just, and also those desires are tend to be culturally based as well. of like a society where you would have a higher position for being all powerful and all knowing
Mm-hmm.
will also make if you live in a
Mm.
society where those don't benefit you, then
Yeah.
I don't think you would have the desire to be all powerful and all knowing. It's
Yeah.
just like so it all depends on our desires and our cultural influences, and then we just project that onto God. But
Right.
instead of like this other view, like the God who isn't making things happening, but rather inviting us into um living in different ways and is experiencing this with us. I think a lot of people that's scary because it feels like you just got rid of God. But I think in reality it's like it's more so the God we actually experience instead of
Right.
some other all-powerful God in some other realm invisible that we're hoping to one day experience.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, you're bringing to mind Alfred North Whitehead. And so I just want to
Hmm.
read a quote because the way you're framing it, I want people to catch this connection because it's huge. He wrote, and then this is nearly 100 years ago or so, right? He wrote, "When the Western world accepted Christianity, Caesar conquered, and the received text of Western theology was edited by his lawyers. The brief Galilean vision of humility flickered throughout the ages, uncertainly, but the deeper idolatry of the fashioning of God in the image of the Egyptian, Persian, and Roman imperial rulers was retained. The church gave unto God the attributes which belonged exclusively to Caesar." And he goes on to basically say that, the vision of the Galilean origin of Christianity does not emphasize the ruling Caesar or the ruthless moralist or the unmoved mover. It dwells upon the tender elements in the world which slowly and in quietness operate by love. And it finds its purpose, he uses the word purpose, in the present immediacy of a kingdom that's not of this world, but is sort of like infusing this world with a lure toward toward the good, toward the beautiful. So anyways,
Yeah.
had to slip in a little more process thought there, but
Yeah,
um,
that's, I mean, it's also a big influence, but also, I know part of the book, do I say, Alfred North Whitehead said, or the process theological version of this doctrine is, and
exactly.
because, very
Yeah.
intentionally, because I wanted people from many other walks of life to be able to engage with this book without running to a barrier where they feel like they need to have read other stuff first. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there is like process theological influence, also like uh, very deep Marxist influence in there.
Yep.
And in the same way, I don't go
Liberationist. Yep.
liberation theologian stuff, new
Yep.
materialist stuff in there. That's all like
Mm.
very much goes into the what I put into this book, but
Yeah.
I wanted to also make it feel like a conversation with your friend
Right.
in a dorm room. It's
And
just like, yeah.
it does have that feel too. So I'm curious then, just on this same theme of creativity and artistry, like who's inspiring you lately? Like what art is inspiring you? What music, what authors, what thinkers? I mean, you just mentioned some movements that have influenced you, right? From process thought to liberationist thought to new materialist thought, whatever. But what art are you engaging with right now? Like what can you not turn off? What can you not turn away from?
Hmm. I think I like the we see it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately is a conversation a lot of people have had is like in the 90s there's this big or from the 60s to 90s there's this big postmodern irony thing in art and media. And then after there seemed to be a generation of people who wanted something more than that irony and a sincerity. They call it a new sincerity, which is or an informed sincerity, which is like aware of all the critiques of this ironic art, but chooses to be hopeful anyway, or chooses to love our world and people anyway.
Mm.
And now I think we're kind of seeing something slowly emerge past that, which is a kind of a sincere absurdism, which is like we're
Mm.
gonna be sincere about everything, including the absurdist. I think we see this a lot in Nathan Fielder's stuff.
Oh
Seen
yeah.
Nathan for
Yeah.
You, The Rehearsal,
Yeah.
which is just like taking something that seems so silly and small, but being so serious and so
Yeah.
sincere. Like, no, this does matter. We have to get this rebuild this whole airport to just have this one conversation and practice this conversation over and over, like in the latest season of The Rehearsal. And it matters. And someone else I think of is Oliver Tree, who just passed away a couple of days ago,
Mm.
singer and artist who had this character he would play where he put on this bowl cut wig and these sunglasses and his mom's old 90s jacket and would just like be like a more extreme version of himself and be just aggressive and louder and just be and just stay as that character for every interview and every music video. And it's just like I think there's something to the idea that all of this is just pretending to be characters. In every conversation and in every job, in every relationship, there is an element of performing.
Mm.
So what if we just perform the best version of ourselves? Like, what if we just like
Yeah.
perform the most loving version of ourselves or the most creative version of ourselves? Like, it's that's something I've been thinking about lately is like, what does that look like? If all of this is just performance, also if there is no true self underneath all the other selves, like true personality or whatever,
Mm. Mm.
then what if we just like what if we really can just act however we want?
Yeah.
And if we can act however
Yeah.
we want, then why don't we just like
Mm.
be good to other people or be
Yeah.
creative, be loving and as
Right.
much as we can.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something I'm thinking about lately. Yeah, so
Mm.
people wise, Nathan Fielder and Oliver Tree are big ones lately.
That's cool. Well, thanks for sharing. Well, maybe we could move toward a little bit of a close. I see, this book and your work at this time, I guess, is a really important conversation. For those of you who are familiar with something like The Purpose-Driven Life, Damon's book is not just a response to one of the best-selling books in history, but it's got a richness to it that I think runs circles around some of the claims in that other book, which I don't haven't engaged with in years and years and years. But so I want maybe if we as we close, like what's interesting about something like The Purpose-Driven Life is that it's basically claiming that like meaning and significance and true identity is found entirely through a relationship with God. And we just talked about you and I about sort of like these two pictures of God that we've inherited, and we've talked about the water that we're swimming in with capitalism. I'm curious for you, like just on a farewell note here on the podcast, like what would your benediction be? What would your pastoral encouragement? And whether or not you see yourself as still walking in that original calling to be a minister, you are doing nothing but exuding, to me like ministerial capacity, which in by that I sort of mean like wisdom and mutuality and coming alongside folks and uplifting helpful and important ideas for people to engage with. So if you had to give your benediction, if you had to give your like your little message right now, at this point in your life, having completed this book, kind of like nearing release, like what would you say is just sort of your offering to people who need a better word on calling in this late capitalist era?
Mm-hmm. I'll say there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to fix. You don't need to become some better version of yourself in order to make life worth it or in order to make you lovable. You already are lovable and worth it. And there, the point of life is already happening. I think if we look at life, everything is creative. Everything is just life creating more life, life enlivening life. And I think we can share the same purpose with all of creation and just see our day-to-day life as a new opportunity to create more life, enliven life, bring life to others. And I think that's a good life. And these people who tell you that you need to be more than that are usually just trying to sell you something. Or just grift off you. And so I think we can have a different life. And you, like I said, you don't need a calling. You need community. And through community, you could find all kinds of small, simple callings that end up, I think, being way better than the burden of a one singular high and holy calling.
Thank you. I received that. I hope all of you out there who are listeners receive that as well. Again, pre-order or grab Damon's book. It's coming out here very soon. There'll be links to that in the podcast show notes. Come hang out with us next Monday night at Third Window Brewing Company, 6 p.m. You don't need a calling book release. Come grab some delicious food. Be in community with real human beings from within which, might emerge some new beauty as we walk in this together. But yeah, check it out. Anything else you want to point people to?
Just, this event. Order the book, damongarcia.com/calling. Check out the book. And also on Instagram, Who is Damon? And YouTube, just Damon Garcia is where most of my stuff is. And thank you for listening. Hope to see you all there on Monday.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to bring up is check out Damon's Instagram videos. I don't know if you want to say anything about that new aesthetic that's in them, but a lot of them were shot at our church here. And I personally love the vibe. So I don't know if there's any vibes you want to speak to. We did
some cool little skit type of videos in an office setting. And that was secretly in the building, in the First Congregational Church building and their offices. So that was fun. Yeah, we had a good time with that.
Yeah, dope. Check it out, everybody. Well, thanks again for being here, Damon. Let's hang out soon.
All right, yeah.
Which we will. All right. Peace and every good, y'all.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, visit www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.